Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Mark Jesinoski. This is the Wizard Podcast, episode 9. I've been really sick this past week. I had the cold from hell, so hopefully I can get through this without getting snot all over the microphone. So, a lot has happened in the past couple weeks, but for those of you who haven't listened to this before, my name is Dr. Mark Jesinoski, and I'm a clinical psychologist and I'm an artist. I started this podcast as the Warrior and the Wizard podcast with my friend Justin Carlisle, and that's something we're continuing to do. The Warrior and the Wizard podcast was all about a clinical psychologist and a combat veteran coming together and talking about not just trauma, but this experience of life, this experience of becoming something and then having that obliterated and torn apart in some ways and having to put it all back together again. We've gotten where we throw this term trauma around a lot, and we throw around the acronym PTSD, and which stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. But it's so much more complex than that. All of us can relate to having experiences in our life that rock our perspective, that dramatically shift our perspective of the way that we see ourselves and the world. And when you experience significant trauma, what it does is it dramatically shocks your perspective of the way you thought the world was. And then you have to either fight against that and try to warp your existing world to fit the way you want the world to be, or you have to start adapting who you are to fit your new perception of the world. You know, sometimes trauma is nothing more than awareness. And I don't say that in any way to minimize real trauma. What I'm saying is there are times when we are so insulated, when we're so protected, we have this perception of the way the world is supposed to be. You see this a lot with younger people. People like to make fun of millennials. But part of that is just we've insulated that particular generation so much that when they start experiencing some of the, not so fun sides of adult life, they aren't necessarily prepared for it. So sometimes trauma is just awareness. Sometimes we have this perception of the way we think the world is supposed to be, and suddenly life wakes us up. And we can have many, many, many moments of these micro traumas in our life. But what Justin and I set out to do is to talk about the trauma of war, the trauma of just dramatically, completely changing your perception of the way the world works and who you are in that world. And then trying to make sense of that after combat, after coming home. If you think about combat veterans, they start out young men and women, fresh out of high school. All of us can relate to being 18 years old and just how young and naive and immature we are. Some people are clearly more grown up than others at that point. But imagine going from that age into basic training into a war zone in less than a year or within a year. Just imagine what that would do to your perception of yourself and the world. And then imagine doing that 2 or 3 times. And then imagine coming home and getting out of the military and now having to figure out how to be a normal person. How to go from having a position of purpose or a place of camaraderie and brotherhood to a place of filling out a Home Depot application or just trying to make ends meet for your family, or having to wait in line for hours and hours and hours to get your basic needs met. Whatever, I'm not going to go off on the VA, and that could be many different things. Just imagine trying to be a patient person in a circumstance where you have been trained to go balls to the wall all the time, and now you're supposed to be really patient, wait in line, not make a fuss. So that's what Justin and I set out to do, and we will carry on that mission. And for now, this is the Wizard Podcast. What I try to do in this is I try to just be honest with who I am in this moment. There's many, many things that cross my mind since I did this last one. My ego and the part of me that is wanting to deliver some nice message, or the part of me that's worried about how you might evaluate what I say, might want to put together a nice little presentation or put together a topic. But I don't think that's really who I am. That's not really how I want to deliver. I just want to hit record and share what's in my heart and share what's on my mind, however that comes out. I think that really challenges me to be authentic. And that's what I value in other people. I notice when I look at other artists, when I look at musicians, when I look at politicians, when I interface with anyone in the world, I'm attracted to people who are authentic. I'm attracted to people who don't bullshit, who speak their mind, who are very clear and honest and straightforward, who have a sense of ethics, a sense of a code that they live by, and they understand the value of that. And we're at a time in our culture right now where we're having a severe lack of adherence to common ethics and common norms. I think this is not where I'm going to go today, but being it's coming out of my brain right now, the only thing that allows us to operate as this independent republic that we are is that we all are held accountable to this thing we call the Constitution. And by extension, we've been held accountable to sort of a system of ethics, a system of norms, and we're supposed to operate within that. This idea of the rule of law and this idea that none of us are above the law. The moment that those ideas crumble is the moment that we are no longer a republic. And of course, all the whataboutism out there, everyone would say, well, what about this? What about that? People have been breaking the rules all along. That's absolutely true. There are corrupt people who have always bent the rules and broken the rules. But by and large, you can look at the Constitution and our system of ethics as sort of a guideline that we're all supposed to follow. And when people get too far outside of that guideline, we're supposed to bring them back in. We, being we the people, or our branches of governments, are supposed to rein in behaviors that are outside the confines of what we have all decided is the way we're supposed to behave. You could even look at this from a religious point of view, from the Ten Commandments point of view. Why do we have the Ten Commandments? These are all rules and ideas that we agree we should all subscribe to and we should all agree to. And really, it keeps society moving. It keeps society going forward in a relatively positive direction. The moment you start taking these things away, you have individuals that start deciding they don't need to follow these rules either. So you have sort of a systematic breakdown. And that would not be a fun world to live in. That would not be a place that I would want to raise my children in. So I'm astounded by people's willingness to completely dismiss factual information in order to adhere to a given point of view, perspective. That's not just with politics. It's also with religion. It's with ideas. It's with teams that it's whatever you have wrapped your mind around. I've shared this in earlier episodes, but whatever you have decided is part of your identity, whatever you've decided is part of your self-worth, whatever has become part of your ego, in other words, ideas, beliefs, experiences, territory, places, people, whatever you have wrapped yourself around, and that has become your identity, you will fight for that thing, even if it means twisting your mind and not accepting reality for what it is. That's really what happens when we watch people that are completely willing to disavow basic reality, basic truth, in order to defend their attachment to a given perspective or a given thing. We know that from Buddhism, we have this idea of attachment. In Christianity, people call it bondage. You could even look at it from a neurobiological point of view, or just a neurological point of view, that whatever our mind and body has learned, whatever we put into memory, whatever we wrap ourselves around, has a capacity to create suffering. Suffering is when your perception of the way the world should be begins to change. It begins to alter. So politics go to the left and you're on the right, and you start to feel that discomfort, and you start to feel that dissonance because you have attached yourself to the idea that this perspective is right and that perspective is wrong. And if we go too far that way, the world's going to fall apart. And vice versa. Completely works both ways. So when you feel that sense of discomfort, when you feel fear, when you feel anxiety, what's really happening is your perception of the way the world should be is being threatened in some way. It's being undermined in some way. You are picking up on information that is making you feel like the world around you is shifting and you need to do something to correct it and fix it. Now, if you're someone that has grown up or experienced a better life than other people, let's say you're a little more privileged, and I'm not getting into the identity politics of that. No way am I going there. I'm just saying, let's just say that you're someone that's had it a little easier than other people. Well, then when your world starts to shift, you're going to feel even more uncomfortable because you're not used to having to adapt yourself to new circumstances. If you're someone that's experienced a lot of trauma, if you've experienced a lot of times in your life where your voice doesn't matter, where you have a perception that either the immediate people in your family or your community or your broader culture does not want to hear your voice doesn't matter, your perspective doesn't matter, you don't matter, then ironically you learn to become a very adaptive person. On the positive side, you learn when to surrender, and you learn to turn that surrender into power. You learn to focus your attention on what you do have power over. On the negative side, we call it learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is my voice doesn't matter no matter what I do. No matter what I do to try to get out of my circumstances, I cannot get out of my circumstances. And so I might as well just give up. I might as well just lie here and give up. And we see that happening across our culture. That sort of interfaces and interacts with this opioid epidemic that we have. So, shifting gears a little bit and just kind of playing off of where I was just going, I've been thinking a lot about suffering in the past week. And I know suffering, this is going to be a real uplifting episode if I talk about suffering. But actually, I want to talk about it in a bit of a different way. It's really been on my mind a lot recently because of my own life experiences, as I've described a fair amount, feeling like I'm in a position of submission in my life, feeling like there are things happening around me that are really out of my hands, and the more energy and the more effort I put into trying to control those things, the more negative it becomes. The more it affects me negatively, the more it might affect my children negatively. So I'm really in a place where, and I'm learning to consider this a gift. I'm learning to turn that submission into non-resistance. I'm learning to turn it into, look at the metaphor of water, being like water, learning to flow, learning to adapt, learning to be very adaptive in the places that I need to be, and learning to really fight and stand my ground where I need to. So because of my own life experiences, I've really had to not just think about this, I've had to experience it, I've had to live it, I've had to learn how to practice differently. I had to learn how to practice differently because you can only live in anger, you can only live in sadness, you can only live in this overwhelming sense of powerlessness for so long. When people experience chronic powerlessness, this is when they either act out or they act in. All these mass shootings we're seeing in society, everyone's got a very half-assed idea about why that stuff is happening. Those are human beings who are suffering profoundly, and they are acting out their suffering. They are acting out the fact that they feel their voice, probably from their perception, they feel, I'm not justifying this behavior, let me be very clear. I'm empathizing with where it comes from. Mass homicide is people tending to act out from a place of ideology or from a place of pain. But at the end of the day, it comes from a sense of powerlessness. It comes from a sense of my voice doesn't matter and I'm going to make my voice heard. The other side of that is suicide. The other side of that is I feel powerless. I feel like I don't matter. I feel like I can't do anything about my suffering. No matter what I do, shit is always happening to me. How many of us hear from these people? We've also had moments where we just feel like, what's going to happen next? You know, the washer and the dryer broke, the car broke down, I don't have enough money to buy food, and I just feel overwhelmed by life. Someone in my family has a sickness or a disease, and the health care is not enough to support them. The medical system, the insurance system is not supporting them the way they need, and you just feel powerless. So I've been in experiencing this in my own life, and thankfully, putting my life in context, I'm a pretty privileged person. I have wonderful people around me. I have a good job. But there's a lot of people that are put in a place of powerlessness that don't have a lot of efficacy for how to deal with that. Efficacy is our perception of our ability to handle stuff. So I had a few people this week I worked with who are just faced with such a profound sense of powerlessness, such a profound sense of suffering, such a profound sense of perceiving that they desperately want their life to be different, and they spend all of their energy thinking about how to make their life different. They want their life different. They're resisting, they're pushing back against their present set of circumstances. And it's creating an overwhelming amount of suffering. I find if you look at this kind of experience in our culture, you can see why people experience such profound suffering when things aren't going well. Because what are we fed in this culture? What we're fed is we're always supposed to feel good. We're always supposed to be happy. We're always supposed to seek out pleasurable experiences. We're supposed to consume to feel good. We're supposed to seek out pleasure. Freud called this the pleasure principle. Alfred Adler called this the inferiority complex. One is the will to power. One is the will to pleasure. Sorry, my nose is running. Viktor Frankl turned this into the will to meaning. These all have deep, deep roots in philosophy and the history of psychology and philosophy. So we're taught in our culture that we're supposed to feel good all the time. If you have symptoms of depression, here's your pill. Let's make it go away. If you have symptoms of anxiety, here's your pill. Let's make it go away. Let's give you something to make it go away, to make you feel better. If you feel better, somehow that means your life is good. Somehow that means success. Somehow we're fed the idea that this is the ultimate goal of life, is just to feel good all the time. No one ever teaches us that our body and our mind are made to feel. That emotions are data. Emotions are wisdom living within us. If we were to be nurtured from a place of wisdom from the time we were born, let's just imagine that we had parents that were wise, and they learned to meditate with us, and they learned to pray with us, and they learned to teach us to listen to our breath. They taught us to listen to our emotions and listen to our instincts, and that there's no such thing as a bad emotion. Then we would learn to perceive our emotions as sources of wisdom. The problem is our emotions get calibrated, just like a machine. Our emotions learn automatically from experience. Those become attached to our ideas. They become attached to our perception of the world, attached to our beliefs. Pretty soon we experience pain because a belief is being challenged. We experience pain because an idea is being challenged. That is precisely what's happening in our country right now on a national level. People are unwilling to experience the suffering of change, the pain associated with having to adapt your beliefs and your ideas to a brand new set of circumstances. Our world has changed dramatically. Things are changing dramatically. People are holding on and fighting for survival of their perceptions and their beliefs. And there are people in power who will use our emotional attachments against us. They will use our ideologies against us. Racism is nothing but an ideology attached to danger. So they will use fears against us to divide and separate us. And they're able to do this because we are afraid and we are suffering. And we are afraid and suffering because we desperately don't want to have to shift our world. We don't have to change. We don't want to have to change dramatically to the dramatic changes going on in our world. No one wants to really honestly think about climate change. If the science is real, and it appears that all of it is, unless you're someone that just purely doesn't want to look at data, regardless of where you think it came from, whether it's naturally occurring ebbs and flows of our planetary and our solar system cycles, or whether it's man-made, whatever, it seems like it's happening, it is going to dramatically shift our world. And I don't think people want to pay attention to this. They don't want to imagine that we're going to have tens of millions of refugees in the next 20 years or more. How are we going to deal with that? How are we going to deal with shifts like that? They don't want to imagine that we are all having to adapt to automation. We're having to adapt to this dramatic shift that technology is going to bring to us. We will adapt. We can adapt begrudgingly, or we can adapt gracefully. And that brings me back to where I was talking about suffering. So I noticed that a lot of psychologists, and I'm not throwing any psychologists under the bus, there's a lot of wonderful psychologists out there. Let's just say healers in general. It's always this inclination that we're supposed to lead people toward feeling better somehow. There's this implicit idea in medicine and in general, any sort of healing medium, that somehow we're supposed to help people feel better. The problem is, if you are trying to help people feel better by selling the idea that you're going to help them escape from suffering, then you're not living in reality with them. You're not helping them come to terms with their reality the way it is. In order to experience true happiness, in order to experience true freedom, true liberation, you must come to terms with your suffering. Something I've been really working on with myself, realizing it is my perception that my life circumstances are wrong, that they are not the way that I want, that I'm losing something very, very important to me. This stuff is legitimate. Your suffering in your life is legitimate. I'm not meaning to delegitimize your suffering. But what happens when you are fighting and fighting and fighting emotionally, physically, spiritually against your life circumstances, and nothing is going to change? You are being submitted. You are being acted upon. Well, you have some choices in that situation. You can keep fighting against it, and you're going to become exhausted. You might become sick in your body. Your emotional pain might turn into physiological pain. This is what often happens with autoimmune type disorders. What we don't realize is chronic emotional pain, chronic fight or flight, chronic anxiety, chronic depression is constantly turning on our autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic branch of our autonomic nervous system, pumping cortisol, pumping adrenaline, messing with our endocrine system, messing with our immune system, messing with our cardiovascular system. All the systems of our body are being affected by profound chronic stress. Eventually, it will lead to sickness. Eventually, your chronic powerless state will lead to sickness if you don't learn how to deal with it differently. And I recognize that in my own life at various times, but particularly the last 2 years, desperately wanting my circumstances to change, desperately wanting to my wife to want to stay committed to our marriage and to work through things with me, and to being powerless to her choices. And I'm not blaming her for that by saying that. I'm just saying, realizing that nothing I say or do is going to change what is happening. So I can sulk in that. I can be angry about that. I can be pissed off. I can hurt the people around me through my anger. I can hurt myself. Or like a lot of the people I've been working with, I can live in chronic depression or chronic anxiety. And Bottom line is, you have to understand that you're making choices here. It's really hard to come to terms with this. Are we choosing our suffering? Are we choosing our pain by how we're choosing to perceive our life circumstances? So I've been thinking a lot about this idea of sitting in the fire. Something that just kind of came to me when I was, and I'm sure it came to me because this is a theme. I believe it's the theme of the phoenix. It's the theme throughout philosophy and even religious history. This idea that sometimes you have to sit in the fire. You have to be cleansed by fire. And what I'm talking about is becoming accepting, even welcoming of my suffering. Realizing that no amount of pushing or pulling or trying to change my circumstances is going to make me feel better. It is not, I can buy everything I want, I can take the pills, I can do whatever I want. It's not going to make me feel better. The only way I'm going to feel better is if I fully 100% radically accept the circumstances I'm in, and I stop doing the perceiving in my mind that this has to change. If it doesn't change, I'm not going to be okay. If it doesn't change, I'm not going to be okay. We tell us this over and over. I got to get out of this. I got to get out of this. I got to get away. I got to run. I got to run away. And it creates suffering. Your perception that you have to run or you have to fight, but you are powerless to do that, creates profound suffering. It creates profound powerlessness. I believe that's happening on a systemic level in our culture right now. We have been fed the idea in the United States of America that we're all supposed to be happy and plump and financially free and having 2 cars in the driveway and everything is great. We've been fed this story. So when you perceive that you're having a hard time getting a job, or you're having a hard time paying the bills, or you're experiencing a profound amount of suffering or pain, you think, well, something must be really wrong in my life. And indeed, your emotions are informing you that things are not correct. But the trick there is, how are you going to relate to this information you're being given, to this wisdom that you have, when in the present moment you can't change your circumstance? What you're going to have to do is you're going to have to surrender. You're going to have to dramatically accept your circumstances and be willing to sit and breathe and learn to observe the suffering, learn to accept the suffering. Learn that, ironically, it's your perception that you need to get away from your circumstances that is actually creating this really icky, nasty suffering that you're experiencing. It's leading you down a dark pathway, that anger, wanting to lash out at others, wanting to hurt others. It's leading you down that dark pathway of wanting to hurt yourself. It's leading you down that pathway of filling your body with food that you don't need, filling your body with substances that you don't need, lashing out at God. Why would God do this to me? There is a spiritual lesson in there. I believe it may be one of the greatest spiritual lessons we can all learn, and that is to completely to surrender to that which you do not have power over. To just be, to accept the suffering that you are in. I'm not saying accept it and that means you should just allow people to take advantage of you, or you should just allow things to take you over. I'm talking about the kind of suffering that you can't escape from. And I don't know if I've done a very good job explaining that right now today, kind of feeling it out as I go. But I had this client this week, and man, he was just in so much pain, and I just felt his pain, and I related to his pain, but his was far more profound than mine. And we spent a few sessions, looking at what are solutions, what are things he could do, what are different things that he could do to find some wiggle room, to find a way out of his present circumstances. The idea being that that's going to give him some relief. When we realize that for the near future, he's not going to be getting out of these circumstances. He's not just going to dramatically change certain relationships and his job and his financial situation and his health situation. So we tearfully went down the road of fully accepting the suffering that he's in right now, coming to terms with that suffering, fully accepting. In other words, not resisting in the body, not resisting in the mind, not pushing back, not fighting, not flailing, not acting out. Simply letting go. Almost full letting go, surrender, and just being in the present moment the way it is. This is what I've been working on in my own life. Now, the irony of this, though, is when you let go of that resistance and you stop that fighting and you stop that flailing, not only does it actually stop feeding these relationships around you that are feeding off of your resistance and your suffering, it completely frees you up to see the world through new eyes. You start seeing things from a different perception, and you start to see where you do have power, where you do have freedom. You start to work on your own attitude. You start to work on your own choices. You become more humble. You become more focused. You stop wasting your time trying to carry the load of other people that you can't carry. It's not yours to carry. You stop wasting your time trying to solve problems that are just not yours to solve. This is a really hard thing to do. I think it's a really important thing to talk about and to share and to understand. To fully come to terms with the things in your life that you are desperately trying to control, that you just can't, that you're desperately trying to fix, but you just can't. And to come to terms with the fact that maybe you've been going about this process of trying to have some healing or some alleviation from your pain the wrong way, and that isn't necessarily your fault. You live in a culture that has made our emotions and our spirituality big business. There are billions and billions of dollars wrapped up in your religion, in your spirituality, in your physical health. There's a reason we all have to wait in line to get pills. There's a reason why there's a referral system the way it is in our medical system. We could go off and on. Y'all get it. We've been fed the idea that unless we feel good all the time, something is wrong. We've been fed the idea that we are supposed to consume endlessly. We've been fed a lot of bullshit ideas in the name of profit. And I'm not, again, one of those. To be clear, I believe in everyone's ability. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a small business owner. So I believe in the idea of capitalism. I believe in the idea of a free market and all that kind of stuff. What I don't believe is people bending and twisting and dramatically shifting the rules. That's not capitalism. And that's what we have got to understand is happening and has been happening forever. The only way that we take this country back, the only way that we get back on our feet, the only way that this doesn't teeter into just another social experiment gone awry is for people to take full ownership and full responsibility over their own mind and their own choices, to be willing to face the shared reality, to be able to willing to face the fact that sometimes you need to change your mind. Sometimes you need to change your circumstances. Sometimes you need to accept that things are not the way you want them to be, but that is okay. Twisting your perception, fighting for beliefs and ideas that are not real, fighting for complete fabricated bullshit misinformation just because it aligns with the way you want the world to be, is fear. Fear will always create more fear. I don't want to be in a culture that is guided by fear. I don't want to teach my children how to be guided by fear. I want to be guided by love. I want to be guided by creativity. I want to be guided by the idea that we want this place to be better, and we want to have each other's backs, and we want to grow. We want to become. We want to be something greater than what we are. We have to come to terms with our reality. We have to come to terms with our suffering. We have to come to terms with the way things are, to be fully accepting of the way things are, and then insert ourselves and be willing to make very strong, very powerful choices based in where you can have some efficacy, where you can have a voice, where you can have some power. So that continues to be where my mind is. Every day I practice listening to my breath. I use my breath to focus my attention in this particular present moment. I work to not anticipate the future. I work to not try to fix the past. I fail on this all the time, and that's okay. I continually bring my attention back to this present moment. I continually focus on acceptance and kindness and creativity in this present moment. And I hope that by sharing my journey openly and honestly with you, maybe you get a little something from it. I would not be doing this if I didn't believe that we need to share our voices, and we need to, there's value in sharing our common experiences with one another. I want you to know that you're not alone in your suffering. And I want you to know that maybe there's a way to navigate your suffering that's a little more productive than the way you have been. I want you to know you've been lied to. I want you to know you've been misled. I want you to take your power back. I'm going to end there. I hope you all have a really wonderful day. I look forward to speaking with you again. This is Dr. Mark Jesinoski. This is the Wizard Podcast, Episode 9. Take care.